The bus was crowded as usual. It was the middle of the afternoon, and people were heading home after a long day of work. Among the passengers was a black girl, no older than 16, sitting quietly in her seat. She had her headphones on, lost in her own world, reading a book. Her surroundings seemed almost irrelevant to her, as if the entire bus didn't exist. It was just her book, and the music playing softly in her ears. She was content, wrapped in the comfort of her routine, not bothering anyone. The bus hummed along, its tires making a rhythmic sound against the pavement. People shuffled in and out of their seats, some chatting softly, others staring at their phones. But amidst the normalcy of the ride, something strange was about to happen. A woman, perhaps in her mid-40s, entered the bus at the next stop. She was wearing a long coat, her heels clicking loudly against the floor as she walked down the aisle. Her eyes scanned the crowd, and when they landed on the black girl sitting in her seat, they narrowed slightly. She paused for a moment, studying the girl, her lips pursed into a tight line. The black girl, unaware of the woman's gaze, continued reading her book, her body language relaxed. The woman, however, was not so relaxed. She tapped the girl on the shoulder, snapping her out of her reverie. The girl, surprised, looked up, pulling her headphones off. "Excuse me," the woman said sharply, her voice cutting through the quiet bus. "You need to get up. That's my seat." The black girl blinked, still dazed from being pulled out of her thoughts. She looked around, trying to make sense of what was happening. The woman, standing tall and now glaring down at her, repeated the demand, her voice growing firmer. "I said, get up. This seat is for me," she insisted. The girl stared at her for a moment, confused and a little wary. "I'm sorry, but I'm sitting here. I don't see why I should get up." The woman's face reddened, her patience thinning. "I don't care," she spat, her words dripping with disdain. "You have to move. You're not supposed to be sitting there." The girl frowned, her confusion now turning into something else. Unease. She had heard things like this before, but it never felt real until now. She didn't know how to respond, so she simply shook her head, her voice quiet but firm. "This is my seat. I'm not moving." The woman's nostrils flared, her body stiff with anger. She crossed her arms over her chest and stepped closer, looking down at the girl. There was a dangerous edge to her voice now. "You think you can just take whatever you want? I'll have you removed if I have to." The girl's heart began to race. She looked around at the other passengers, hoping for some sign of help or support, but everyone seemed to be avoiding eye contact, their heads buried in their phones, or staring out the windows. No one was intervening. It was just her and the woman, alone in this confrontation. The bus slowed as it approached the next stop, and more passengers climbed aboard. But the woman's eyes remained locked on the girl, her expression darkening with every passing second. She was determined. The girl could feel the tension building like an invisible wall closing in around her. She knew she had to stay calm, but it was becoming harder. Then, just as the woman was about to open her mouth again, demanding the girl move, the sound of the door opening interrupted. A man stepped onto the bus. He was tall, with a broad frame, and there was something about the way he carried himself that made the other passengers take notice. He wasn't loud or obnoxious. He simply had a presence that commanded attention. The man didn't look at the woman or the girl at first. He walked past them, as if this scene wasn't his concern. But then, just as he passed by the woman, he stopped, his hand resting on the pole for balance. He turned to face the woman who was still standing over the girl, and that was when the air seemed to shift. The woman noticed him for the first time. She turned to look at him, and their eyes met. His expression was calm, but there was a seriousness in his gaze that immediately made the woman hesitate. The girl, still shaken, watched as the man moved closer. The moment seemed to hang in the air like a held breath. Something was about to change. The man stood still for a moment, his eyes locked with the woman's. His presence was undeniable, and the tension in the air grew thicker. The woman, who had been so sure of herself just moments ago, suddenly seemed unsure. Her lips parted, ready to say something, but the words caught in her throat. The girl, still seated in her spot, looked up, unsure of what was happening. She had noticed the man's calm demeanor as he had walked onto the bus, but his sudden involvement in this standoff left her both relieved and confused. Who was this man? Why was he getting involved in a situation that had nothing to do with him? The woman, clearly irritated by the interruption, narrowed her eyes at the man. "What are you looking at?" she snapped, her voice harsh and defensive. She seemed to think that by challenging him, she could regain control of the situation. The passengers around them shifted uncomfortably, sensing that things were about to escalate, but the man didn't flinch. He didn't even seem to care about the woman's hostility. Instead, he simply stood his ground. "You need to leave the girl alone," he said calmly, his voice steady and strong, carrying a weight that seemed to settle over the entire bus. His words were not a suggestion. They were a command. The woman's eyes widened, and for a moment, she looked around at the other passengers, almost as if she was seeking their support. But no one met her gaze. Instead, everyone seemed to look away, hoping to avoid getting caught in the drama. The silence of the bus was deafening, punctuated only by the soft hum of the engine. "You're telling me what to do," the woman said, her voice dripping with disbelief. Her earlier bravado was quickly melting away. "Who the hell do you think you are?" The man didn't answer her question. He simply reached into his jacket, his movements slow and deliberate. The air seemed to go still as the woman's eyes followed his every move. The passengers on the bus, too, were watching now, all of them aware that something significant was unfolding before them. The man's hand emerged from his jacket, and in his grip was a shiny, official-looking badge. He held it out in front of the woman, the metal glinting under the bus lights. The woman's eyes widened in shock as she recognized the badge, the unmistakable emblem of the FBI. She froze. The words she had been preparing to say got stuck in her throat. She opened and closed her mouth, her face paling as the realization of what had just happened sank in. The man wasn't just some bystander. He was someone with authority, someone who had the power to put an end to her actions in an instant. For a moment, the woman said nothing. Her mouth opened again, but this time, no words came out. The man didn't press further. He simply stood there, his presence alone speaking volumes. The passengers, sensing the shift in power, leaned in slightly, waiting for the woman to react. It was clear that the dynamics of the situation had changed completely. The girl, still sitting in her seat, watched the scene unfold with wide eyes. She had been caught in the middle of this confrontation, unsure of what was happening, but as the FBI badge gleamed in the man's hand, she began to understand. She wasn't alone anymore. Someone had her back. The woman, now visibly shaken, took a step back, her hand going to her mouth as she stammered. I didn't know. I'm sorry. I didn't mean." But the man didn't wait for her apology. His voice remained calm, but there was no mistaking the authority in his tone. "I suggest you take your seat and stop bothering this girl," he said firmly. "If you don't, we'll have a bigger problem." The woman looked around, her face a mixture of humiliation and fear. She had started this argument, but now she was the one who was trapped. The weight of the situation seemed to crush her, and her earlier anger gave way to confusion. She glanced at the passengers again, but this time, no one was looking away. Everyone was watching her, waiting for her next move. Her pride, once so solid, crumbled under the weight of the man's calm authority. With one last glance at the girl, she muttered something under her breath and turned around, stepping away from the seat. She didn't look back as she moved toward the back of the bus, her shoulders slumped in defeat. The tension that had gripped the bus moments ago seemed to dissipate as she retreated, her presence no longer a threat. The man, still standing, turned to the girl. His eyes softened, and a small nod passed between them, an unspoken acknowledgement of what had just happened. The girl, still processing everything, gave a shaky smile. She was safe now. The man had made sure of that. But the moment wasn't over yet. There was still one more thing to come. Something that would bring this confrontation to a powerful conclusion. The bus was eerily quiet now, the kind of silence that makes you feel the weight of every movement, every breath. The woman had retreated to the back, her face still flushed with embarrassment and anger, but she didn't dare make another move. The passengers, once silent witnesses to a growing confrontation, now watched her closely. The atmosphere in the bus had shifted from one of tension to uneasy relief. The man, his FBI badge still visible in his hand, stood near the girl, his presence still commanding the attention of everyone on board. His posture was calm, but his eyes scanned the room, taking in the stillness of the passengers. He wasn't threatening, but there was something undeniable about the authority he carried. His calmness had a strange power, one that everyone on the bus seemed to feel. It was like he had spoken the language of power with just a look, and no one dared question it. The girl, still sitting in her seat, felt a wave of relief wash over her. Her heartbeat had slowed, and the tight knot of anxiety in her stomach loosened. She had been scared, not knowing how this woman's tirade would end. But now, as she looked up at the man, she could feel the weight of his protection. There was something comforting about his presence. She had been afraid of the woman's words, but now she realized that she had nothing to fear anymore. "Are you okay?" the man asked, his voice soft but steady. He finally addressed her, looking down with a genuine concern that made her feel safe, seen, and respected. The girl, still shaken, nodded. "I'm fine. Thanks to you." Her voice was small, but there was gratitude in her eyes. He smiled briefly, acknowledging her thanks with a small nod. "It's my job to make sure that people like her don't get away with things like that." He glanced over at the woman, now slumped in the back of the bus, sitting in a seat far from anyone else, her face still flushed. People like her think they can take control, but when they try to hurt others, they need to learn that there are consequences. The girl nodded, understanding the gravity of the situation. The woman had tried to bully her, humiliate her, but now she was the one who was humiliated. And the man had made sure of that. He wasn't loud. He didn't need to shout. His quiet authority had done all the work. The passengers, who had been watching the entire exchange, seemed to breathe a collective sigh of relief. Many of them looked at the man with quiet admiration. The tension that had been thick in the air just moments ago had lifted, replaced with an almost reverential stillness. The man's simple act of stepping in had reminded them all of something important. Not all battles need to be fought with fists or words. Sometimes, a calm but firm stand is all it takes to put someone in their place. But the man wasn't finished. He looked at the girl one more time, his eyes filled with quiet reassurance. "No one should ever make you feel small. Remember that," he said. His words were gentle, but they carried a weight that made her believe in their truth. The girl swallowed, her heart swelling with appreciation for this stranger who had stepped in without a second thought. "I won't forget," she said softly, a smile breaking through the lingering unease in her chest. As the bus continued on its route, the man took a step back, settling into an empty seat nearby. His eyes never left the woman, who was still slumped in her seat, unwilling to look anyone in the eye. The passengers around her shifted uncomfortably, some still casting glances her way, others pretending not to notice. No one spoke to her. The power had shifted, and there was no longer any room for her rude behavior. The girl, still holding her book in her lap, let out a deep breath. She could feel the weight of the moment settle on her, and for the first time since the confrontation began, she allowed herself to relax. She wasn't just a victim in this story. She was a survivor, and the man's quiet, unshakable confidence had reminded her of her own strength. As the bus approached her stop, the girl stood up, her movements a little more confident now. She glanced over at the man, who gave her a small nod, a silent signal that everything was going to be okay. She smiled back at him, a mix of relief and gratitude washing over her. The bus doors opened with a soft hiss, and the girl stepped off, feeling the cool air rush against her skin. She turned around just once, her eyes meeting the man's for a brief moment before the doors closed behind her. Inside the bus, the woman had not moved from her seat. She still refused to look up, her face a mixture of shame and fury. No one said anything to her as the bus continued its journey, but the man's quiet victory had left an impression on everyone on board. The power of authority, when used with grace and precision, had been enough to put an end to an ugly situation, and that was something no one would soon forget. The bus rolled on through the city streets, the usual hum of wheels against pavement punctuated by the occasional stop. But inside, the atmosphere had changed entirely. The tension that had once filled the air, thick and oppressive, had dissipated, replaced by a quiet calm. It was a calm that everyone on board shared, a calm born from the power of authority, the strength of standing up for what's right, and the knowledge that the wrongs of the world could sometimes be corrected in the most unexpected of ways. The woman who had started the confrontation, the one who had demanded the black girl give up her seat, was now a shadow in the back of the bus. Her head was lowered, her arms folded tightly in front of her, as though trying to shield herself from the weight of the stares she could feel but dared not meet. She didn't speak, didn't make a sound. She had been put in her place, and there was no arguing that. But it was the girl who had been the real focus of the entire ordeal. She was still seated near the front of the bus, her heart now calm, her mind processing everything that had just happened. She had been a victim of someone else's prejudice and arrogance, but now, with the intervention of the man, her new protector, she was no longer a passive participant. She had been empowered. She had been given something more than just safety. She had been given the strength to walk away from that moment with her head held high. As the bus continued its journey, the girl found herself thinking back to everything that had just unfolded. She could still feel the woman's harsh words and the anger in her eyes, but it was different now. The girl realized that those words, those insults, were nothing compared to the quiet strength of the man who had stepped in. He hadn't yelled. He hadn't raised a fist. He had simply shown his badge, and in that simple gesture, he had restored balance to the world around them. The girl's stop was approaching. She knew she would soon have to leave the safety of the bus and face the rest of her day. But as she glanced at the man one more time, she felt a sense of gratitude that words could barely express. He had done more than just stop a confrontation. He had shown her what it meant to stand up against hatred and injustice without needing to become part of the conflict. His calm, his authority, and his grace in the face of adversity had made all the difference. The girl stood, her movements more confident now, her back straighter, her head lifted high. As she made her way to the doors, she glanced over at the man once again. Their eyes met for just a brief moment, but in that moment, everything was understood. There were no words exchanged, no thanks needed. She didn't have to say anything because she knew. She knew that he had done what needed to be done. The bus doors opened with a soft hiss as she stepped off, and for the first time in a long while, she felt something she hadn't felt in months. Peace. It wasn't just the peace of escaping an uncomfortable situation. It was the peace of knowing that even in a world filled with hate, there were people who would fight for what was right. There were people who would stand up against injustice, even in the smallest of ways. She turned back to look one last time, the doors closing behind her, and as the bus pulled away, she could see the man still sitting there, watching her go. His expression was unchanged, as calm as ever. And as the bus drove away, a final thought crossed her mind. That moment, that small but powerful act of kindness and authority, would stay with her forever. It wasn't just about that one incident on the bus. It was about the lesson it had taught her, never to back down in the face of cruelty, to always stand tall, and to know that there is power in doing what's right, no matter how small the gesture might seem. Back inside the bus, the woman still hadn't moved. She sat in her seat, her face flushed with shame, the realization that she had lost this battle weighing heavily on her. But no one said anything to her. No one made her feel worse than she already did. Everyone around her remained silent, their thoughts a mixture of relief and quiet satisfaction. The man's intervention had been more than enough to silence her, and no further words were needed. The bus continued on, its passengers returning to their lives, but for all of them, the memory of what had just happened would linger. They had witnessed a simple truth, that sometimes power is not loud or boisterous. It doesn't need to be. Sometimes it's the quiet, steady hand of authority, wielded with grace and purpose, that brings about the most powerful change. And for the girl, this experience was a turning point. She knew that from now on, she would carry that strength with her wherever she went. The world could be full of challenges, but with the right kind of support and the courage to stand tall, she would always find a way to rise above.